I'm going to share the screen. And thank you for bringing that up because I would have totally forgotten. David's not here. Okay. So.
Okay, one other thing you might want to do.
Yes.
Is move that group. Yes, exactly.
Right. Okay. So the very end of the Megillah, it tells us Mordechai the Jew was viceroy to King Achashverosh, and he was considered great among the Jews and accepted by most of his brethren, which is damning with faint praise. Most people liked him. He wasn't that he was well liked by the Jews. There's some people, the jury was out by some people. Seeking the good of his people and speaking peace to all their seed. Actually, this is the final verse in the Megillah. So what is the deal with most people liked him? He just brought them salvation, right? So see how best to do this. Okay, accepted by most of his brethren, but not by all his brethren. This is from the Talmud. I mean, the Rashi, well, it's from the Talmud, but Rashi brings it here on the verse. But not by all his brethren. Why? Because part of the Sanhedrin disassociated from him when he became close to the government and neglected his studies. Let's think about this for a second. Get yourself into the Torah mindset. Torah is a top value for us. It's not just for taking time for a study. It's for a person who can. Investment in Torah study is really top of the heap, except when there's a mitzvah to do that they can't avoid it. They have to go and make a living. But Torah is top of the heap, should be filling in all the spaces in our lives. For the Sanhedrin, great judges, great rabbis, you'd think that they're totally immersed in the law and in the study. Now, Mordechai, the Torah tells us, the Megillah tells us, he became a public figure. He was now a political activist. He was viceroy to Achashverosh. He wasn't just the local palace Jew. He got involved in government. So part of the Sanhedrin, part means not majority, part of the Sanhedrin said, what's up with you? You're a member of the Sanhedrin, a great rabbi. What's going to be with Torah? So the language is that they kind of distance themselves, or it's the Hebrew. It's associated is fine as a translation. Now, so that's why it says most of the Sanhedrin also was with him, but some of them said you're doing the wrong thing. What is the Megillah trying to tell us? None of the Torah is fully a history book. What the Megillah ends off a story when, for posterity, sitting in Basking Ridge, and we're going to celebrate Purim, and we're going to celebrate a hero named Mordechai. We're going to be reminded not everybody liked him. Not everybody will get along with him. Why would you stick that in? And it's the end. That's your final taste of the Megillah. So what is the Megillah trying to tell us? What's the point? Okay, so this is text. Yes, this is text 2. So this is from one of the great Talmudic commentaries. It says, from the fact that it states only a minority disassociated, we can further the majority didn't agree and sided with Mordechai. Okay.
F5.
I'm at 5?
Yeah. F5 will advance it to the next slide.
Oh, F5. Got it. Thank you. Okay. So from the fact that it states only a minority disassociated, so right now, so we say there is a debate. The weight of opinion goes with that Mordechai did the right thing by trying to balance community service and a study. But the Torah, the Megillah wants to stick in that some people didn't. And F5 is not working.
Okay, so
But okay.
Get the correct slide.
Yeah, okay. If you take a look, it says text 3. Here's a question. Let's look at Sanhedrin in general. In the Sanhedrin was very important. You know, today in our court system, I believe, let's say in the Supreme Court, you have dissenting opinions. it's whatever, it's 5-3, whatever it is, so what who felt, and they go by the majority. In Torah law, actually, it's not supposed to work that way. A court is supposed to issue a ruling and does not share its bookkeeping with with people. You can say that they definitely have to show that the reasoning behind the judgment. They can say that this opposing view was brought up and considered, but you don't identify who had which opinion. That's called speaking out of school. They have to be together, and therefore a judge who didn't agree with the judgment is not allowed to say, what do you want from me? It was them. I voted against it.
How many judges were in St. Pedro?
I'm sorry?
How many judges?
71. But it actually goes for even the regular bet in of 3. They're not supposed to undermine, to say, well, don't blame me. They're part of a unit. They stay part of the unit.
And all 71 have to have the opinion.
If it was Sanhedrin, there was a smaller Sanhedrin of 23, but if it was a Sanhedrin, there had to be, if they couldn't be there, there were supplements. There were auxiliary rabbis. Okay. So in text 3, we bring from the Talmud, if 2 judges say exempt, they rule that someone's exempt from payment, and another one says the litigant is liable to pay, the defendant is exempt. If 2 say liable and one says exempt, the defendant is liable. We go by the majority. After finishing the matter and reaching a decision, the judge is bringing the litigants. The greatest of the judges says, so-and-so, you are exempt from paying, or so-and-so, you're liable to pay. From where is it derived that when the judges leave the courtroom, they may not say, hey, I deemed you exempt. My colleague deemed you liable. I want you to still invite me to your bar mitzvahs because I was on your side. What can I do with my colleagues outnumbered me, and consequently you're deemed liable? They're trying to save their own skin here. About this it is stated, the Talmud tells us, you shall not go as a talebearer among your people. What you're doing is you're shifting guilt in a person's eyes to the other people. If you can't take the heat, don't then get out of the kitchen. Don't be a judge. But you have to be prepared going to be a judge that you're going to bear responsibility for the majority of people. One who goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets, but one who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter. Is the language of Proverbs. So we see that if the idea is that a Sanhedrin does not split and a Sanhedrin does not give, side opinions, so it makes the story question even stronger. Let's say there was deliberation. What are we going to do with Mordechai? Are we going to let him do this? Maybe we should kick him out of the Sanhedrin if he wants to be viceroy Tachashvesh. Megillah tells us that the majority agreed. Leave it that way. Why do you have to put in for prosperity that the minority disagreed? What is the point? They're obviously trying to send us a message. They're obviously trying to teach us something. Now, what does that teach us? Let's try to see what they're trying to teach us. First of all, there is a tension, a very clear tension in Jewish thoughts for millennia between this ideal of we can just sit, study, and pray all day, and studying Torah is top of the heap, and then living a life, not only taking care of ourselves and our families, but also there's a community that needs us. If there's someone who needs visiting during because they're still shut in from COVID, and I'm sitting and studying, I have to maybe what's the balance? Or maybe there isn't. Maybe Torah study trumps everything. So look at text 4a. One is engaged. Oh, a second. Sorry. If one is engaged in the study of the Torah and the time has come to read the Shema, they should interrupt studying and read the Shema and recite the blessings before and after it. If one is engaged in public duties, rather complete them and then read the Shema, there's still time to do so. So in law, it seems to be pretty clear that Torah doesn't absolutely trump everything. First of all, if it's time for me to recite Shema, I should close my book and do my mitzvahs reciting the Shema. But then it says even more, if I am now in the middle of setting up for a Purim party, how incredible is that? How important is that? I'm not praying, I'm not studying, I'm not teaching. I'm schlepping tables. Necessary for a Purim party. And I'm the only one around. Says, if you're engaged in public duties, do not stop. Rather, finish what you're doing, and if you have time to recite Shema. And if you don't, then you missed the Shema, because Shema is within an amount of time.
So based on that, the Sanhedrin were wrong to disassociate from it.
That's there. If we stopped it here, you'd absolutely see that. Now, they're in Sanhedrin, they know this law too. So what do they think? Now you look at text 4b, which is a commentary on the Maimonides. It says, it emerges that public need is greater even than exclusive Torah study. For when it comes to reciting the Shema, even one exclusively dedicated to Torah study must interrupt their studies, where one can engaged in community service should not. Public need is greater than exclusive Torah study. That's one side of the coin. Now, they brought one example of the Talmud, but there's plenty every morning in our prayers. They didn't bring it here. I would, if I was on the editorial board, I probably would bring it. Every morning, we read a piece of Mishnah, which talks about wonderful mitzvahs that we do in helping people, in the disadvantaged, and all of that. And then it says, study of Torah is outweighs them all. Torah study is top of the heap. And then, so here it brings, in text 5, you're going to bring a piece. There's what happens is in the Torah, in the scripture, there's an episode where people, it's not very clear from the scripture, but two people, Eldad and Medad, are somewhat being disrespectful to Moses. And Joshua, Moses' primary student, says to Moses, take care of them. He can't stand seeing these people being disrespectful to his teacher. And he uses the Hebrew word kalayim. But kalayim is a funny Hebrew word. So the Talmud asks us, what is the meaning of the words in the verse, imprison them, kalayim? Kalayim is translated mostly, it means put them in prison. They're doing terrible things. They're being disrespectful to our master and teacher Moses. So the Talmud puts a different twist on that word. Joshua said to Moses, I'll be even more effective than imprisoning them is make them leaders. That'll really get them. Place responsibility for the needs of the public upon them, and they will expire on their own. Being a leader of people, especially of Jews, not an easy thing. And he says, so what Joshua said, they're standing on the sideline criticizing you, put them in a position of authority. We'll see what they say now. I've tried that. It actually works. Because when you're receiving the stones, all of a sudden you understand more of what it means to be making decisions.
But doesn't that contradict the death sentence placed in other spots in the Bible?
What do you mean?
In other words, if you put them in prison,
Yeah,
and they'll die on their own at some point, that means you don't have to kill them. Now, there are various points in the Bible that state stoning, etc.
right. But those are very rarely meted out, and even prison was a rare thing. But being disrespectful to Moses, there's no capital punishment for that. But he was saying, what the Talmud is saying, he didn't even mean prison. He means make them your assistant. Soon they'll understand how difficult it is. But what does this mean? Therefore, the idea of public, how the Talmud is looking at being a public servant is not easy. And something, we can look and say that it really runs counter to having a normal, spiritually sane life. So on the one hand, we said that public duties are really important and even trump Torah study. But on the other hand, we can understand why members of the Sanhedrin said, "Are you kidding? You're becoming viceroy? You're gonna destroy yourself." So now let's try and understand more about the two angles. So if you break it down now, the majority of the Sanhedrin seemed to agree with Mordechai and said, he's doing the right thing. He's becoming a public servant. He's brought into the government. He's going to have access to be able to help us. He's going to be able to help the Jewish people. He's a rabbi. He's a judge. He's going to do all of that, but he's also going to do this. Excellent. Go for it, Mordechai. A minority of the Sanhedrin say doing the wrong thing. Let's try to understand. There are two poles. There are two ways of looking at this. There's a way of looking at that public service will interrupt even Torah study. Another way of saying the public service is going to kill you, so then maybe just leave the job. Become a public servant. Don't be a rabbi anymore. So this is based on a talk that Rebbe once gave, and in order to understand this, the Rebbe brought an anecdote, a vignette from history, and it's going to be in text 6. Before I get there, there was in the shtetl in the old days in Europe, Torah study was at a premium. We had some really great rabbis and wonderful deep books on Talmud and Jewish law and spirituality and Kabbalah, all of these things for hundreds of years going on in Eastern Europe. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a specific man from the city of Dvinsk, and he, aside from having a photographic memory, which it was not so unusual by brilliant people, he was known as being really above the heap of even the geniuses. And he's known as the Rogachover genius, Gaon, the Rogachover. And in the world, the yeshiva world, he's a well-known person. The Rogachover was not a Chabad guy, but he was very close to the Chabad Rebbes. The Rebbe actually got ordination from him, but he was much younger. So, if you look at text 6, this is from a talk that Rebbe gave in the 70s. After the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe's father, was forced to leave Russia and arrived in Riga, Latvia. So, just historically, the Rebbe Lubavitch was the Chabad was based in Russia. It was based for most of its time in its existence in the city of Lubavitch, which is White Russia. The Rebbe's previous Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law, who lived through communist times, and he was someone who refused to bow to communist demands that they not spread Judaism, and he committed himself and his disciples to doing whatever they could to promote Judaism, even to the point of being arrested and killed. They put themselves out. Previous Rebbe was arrested, and he was sentenced to death in 1927 because of a public outcry. The death sentence was commuted to life, and then they kicked him out of the country.
Public outcry by whom?
Partially the United States, but there was more. And even though the Chabad wasn't such a big thing then, but there was definitely the United States for sure. And he was kicked out of the country, and so he went first to Riga. Then he ended up in Poland, and then the war came out, and he came here during the war in 1940. But first he went to Riga. So when he was forced to leave Russia and arrived in Riga, he attended a conference of rabbis, community leaders, and activists dedicated to the cause of Russian Jewry. So we have actually records today of gatherings that went on in Riga at the time and other countries of, well, what are we going to do for Russian Jewry because of communism? Because we can't just allow millions of people to be totally smothered by the government. It was unusual. So they had a gathering of, again, this was led primarily by Chabad Rebbe, but it was not just a Chabad thing. And the Rogachover Gaon, the genius of Rogachover, activists. the Rogachev was asked to be part of this committee, which means he would have to put time into it. Rogachev was known that he never stopped studying. He never stopped studying, except when he had his yarmulke off. And he's the only time he had to take his yarmulke off was take a shower or something. And if you see pictures, he had long hair because he didn't want to take it off for a haircut. He was always studying. So for him, this was going to. I'm going to spend time figuring out how to let kids in Russia study Aleph Beis. So he demurred, stating that the decision to participate is hinged upon an argument between the Babylonian and Jerusalem. So the Rogachev, he declined. We're not criticizing him for this. He had his thing. You need geniuses. He devoted himself to what he does best, and he respected very much what was going on as community activist. He showed up to the meeting, but he said, "I can't be part of it." Why can't I be part of it? He's a guy who lives Torah. He says, "I'll explain to you through Torah why I can't do this." And he went to, let's look at 7a. The Rogachev explained. The Talmud tells us, the sages taught the early generations of pious men would wait 1 hour, pray 1 hour, and then wait 1 hour. That's for 3 times a day. They're praying. They spend an hour in meditation, an hour in prayer, and then an hour just integrating the prayer into themselves, so it's not just walking away from prayer, but becoming a better person from the prayer. So how in the world do you lead a productive life in the way we know it when you're spending 9 hours a day in prayer? It's not only our question. The Talmud asked it. Since early pious men would spend 9 hours per day engaged in prayer, how was the Torah preserved? How was their work accomplished? First of all, when did they study Torah? How did their Torah is it preserved? In other words, obviously they were studying too. So how does that end up sticking with them? And number 2, these were shoemakers and the tailors, whatever. They were all working to support their families. When are they going to work? And how are they going to study? That means that the whole day is prayer. Talmud makes a statement. It says, because they were pious, they merited that the Torah is preserved and their work is blessed. So the Talmud tells us, you're talking about people of great spiritual stature. And they're indeed spending an inordinate amount of time communing with God. But for most of us, we study, and then you have to review. Otherwise it's for today and tomorrow. In 2 days, you don't remember what you studied before. Here, so they, because of their great piety, their Torah was preserved. They were able to remember. They had a better memory. They were retaining what they studied, and therefore they were able to. They didn't have to review. They could keep on moving on, so they were able to not lose. In the Torah study, the prayer allowed it was more review time was being donated to prayer than study time, and their work was blessed. They because God blessed them, that even though they didn't have that many hours to devote to work, they were successful enough to be able to have enough to support their families. That's what the Talmud says. None of us thinks we're one of these pious people, but at least I don't. But this was something, and this was not something that the Talmud was advocating for the masses, saying there is such a thing as a person who's praying and spending so much time in prayer, but God blesses them that they don't lose out from the prayer in the Torah study or in their ability to support their families. Now, one of the things, without getting too much into the history of this, we had in JLI, there are 2 Talmuds. Because with the split in what happened then in Israel, and when the Romans came in, and not the time we're talking about now with the Babylonians, but when the Romans came to Israel at the beginning of the 1st century, a little before the Common Era, and then for centuries in the afterwards, in the first few centuries of the Common Era, they were brutal, and Israel it was very difficult to have academies, yeshivas, and study. That's when Babylonia really ballooned. So that's the era of time when the Talmud was developing. And we had it in JLI. The Mishnah is the core that was written in Israel. what we call the Gemara, the Talmud, is an unfolding of that. And that went on concurrently in Israel and in Babylonia. When we study today, we study the Babylonian Talmud. I have the Jerusalem Talmud. Some people study it, but it's just not. When someone says the Talmud says, they're talking about the Babylonian Talmud. And the accept of the Babylonian Talmud with any commentaries we have on it, which is not many, could maybe fill a shelf. But you could fill a library, an entire library with the Talmud, with the Babylonian Talmud and all the commentaries, because they're still being written. So there are these two Talmuds. What I just read to you in 7a is from the Babylonian Talmud. What does Jerusalem Talmud have to say about this? It says the same thing, then it adds something. 7b, it adds the last. It changes the verbiage of the last paragraph of 7a. It says Rabbi Yitzchak ben Rabbi Elazar said because they were pious. These people who prayed 9 hours a day or were meditating. It says their study was blessed. It doesn't say the study was preserved. It says it was blessed, and their work was blessed. So it looks like, as the Rogatchover pointed out, that the Jerusalem Talmud, the Israeli Talmud, is saying that because you're spending so much time in meditation, your study will flourish. There's remembering, and then there's gaining and expanding and getting new insights. It says it will be blessed, it will flourish. And the Babylonian Talmud just seems to say it'll be preserved, but you're not going to flourish. Okay, you gave up for prayer. You're going to study, but it's not going to be. You're not going to have the same level of success in study if you're spending 9 hours a day in meditation, because the laws of physics, the time is being allocated in a specific way. So now let's look at text 8, and we'll conclude this. The Rogatchover concluded, this is from the Rebbe, my participation in this committee will require me to take off some time from my usual Torah study. So according to the Jerusalem Talmud, it won't lead to diminishing the sum total of my knowledge. If I go by the guidance of the Jerusalem Talmud, I should be fine. I can work with you. I can be part of this. I can be part of the committee worrying about kids not studying Aleph Beis or being able to study Torah in Russia. Jerusalem Talmud says, I'll be fine. I'll be blessed by God. But the halacha, Jewish law, doesn't follow the Jerusalem Talmud. Jewish law follows the Babylonian Talmud, which states the Torah is preserved. So my Torah is not going to grow. It's just going to be preserved. Accordingly, I would be losing out on the added Torah study I would have gained while studying during the time and I'll sacrifice this community. I can't give this up. He's saying, God bless you guys, but this is not for me. And in truth, you say, for history, we needed a Rogatchover. You need people who are really going to devote themselves and they're going to write books that last for centuries to come. God bless him. This isn't about criticizing him. He said, God bless you. It's not for me. Because I see my Torah study is going to suffer. Now, let's understand what it's saying. Why would the Babylonian Talmud feel one way? Is there a reason that we can understand the differential of how they saw this? So let's take a look at a piece of Talmud. Talmud tells us about the Babylonian Talmud. It takes a verse. It brings us a verse from Lamentations. And the verse says that God has made me dwell in dark places as those that have been long dead. That doesn't sound good. But Rabbi Yirmiyah says this refers to the Talmud of Babylonia, which is not as clear as the Talmud of Israel. When one opens up, if you open up a book, if I took out here in English a book of, I have something called a restatement of rabbinic civil law, which is Talmudic law, restated in our normal legal language, written by a rabbi and an attorney. So I'm looking at it right there. If I sat here, I'll go, chapter 1, this law, that law, this. You read it through. It is what it is. We can talk about what it means, but it's laid out lucidly. That's the way the Jerusalem Talmud is. It's very straight. The Babylonian Talmud is full of debate. It says, here's this verse. What does it mean? One opinion, another opinion. Why that opinion? We're looking at the logical proofs against it. They're battling it out. And then what about 1 second? There's that verse that seems to indicate otherwise. And we heard from that rabbi said this. It's much more circuitous. It's much more engaged. You have to battle through the logical, the discussion and the arguments. But when you come out with, what you come out with is a much more distilled product. Because process creates a more involved process tends to create a clearer product. And even in that, I don't want to get into this too much now, but if we were talking about something here, and I said, this is a law of Purim. You walk out, Mendy said a law of Purim. Some people remember, some people don't remember. If someone says, 1 second, how could that be a law of Purim? Doesn't make sense. We say, I explain it. Say, well, someone says, but I don't know what you just said doesn't make sense. Also, because what could it be? Maybe it means something else. And we sit here for 20 minutes working it out. And not only have I made the case of the law I was saying, but I've explained why the alternative opinions are not holding up. You walk out with a law, you're more likely to remember it too. Because not only do you know what the law is, you know what's not the law. You know why, which thought processes did not make the cut, so to speak.
Okay,
Yeah.
going back to text 7a.
Okay.
Basically, they're talking about study, rest, and study. And it
What do you
seems to
study?
me,
Rest study. What do you mean is rest?
in other words, direct study of the Talmud or the Bible, then take an hour, meditate on it.
No, this was about prayer.
No,
No, this was about prayer.
Yeah.
This is all about prayer, not study.
okay, but the point is, if you're studying, you're working, and you go into brain fog after a while.
Apparently they didn't. You and I do. So it wasn't one of their problems. So, but here we're saying is the Babylonian Talmud saw and valued the beauty of the idea of that of the producing from our study, just taking something and really distilling it. And if you look at text 9b from one of the Chabad Rebbes, Rabbi Shalom Dober, 1 second. He writes, in the Babylonian Talmudic discipline, the primary objective is intellectual investigation, asking questions, dealing with darkness until arriving at the truth. By contrast, the Jerusalem Talmudic discipline is primarily clear-cut halacha decisions without much investigation. Now, how does the intellectual investigation work? The initial understanding is questioned from all sides, clouding the full revelation of the truth of the matter, and eventually leads to a greater level of understanding. The person must throw themselves into the subject with deep penetrating analysis and meditation, and thereby, oops, I'm sorry. Just want to make sure you can see everything here. I think so. And thereby reaches the true understanding of the matter, how and what it truly is. The Talmud states as much. The verse states, he has made me dwell in darkness, which is what we just read. This is a reference to the Babylonian Talmud. The style of study is associated with abundant investigation and groping in the dark until finally arriving at the light. By contrast, the Jerusalem Talmud is primarily decisive halacha, as it has been passed down through the generations. Halacha is Jewish law, but without much investigation. In this discipline, there isn't much darkness, so it's much easier to arrive at the bright truth without much investigation. The Israeli sages were privy to much light without any obstructions. But in the diaspora, the light of Torah was integrated in multiple layers of concealment. And so the student must peel them away. This is the advantage of the Jerusalem Talmud over its Babylonian counterpart. So while the Jewish law follows the Babylonian counterpart, and we talk about the quality that comes from the struggle, there's a beauty to the clear thinking that doesn't need the struggle. And that's we admire the Jerusalem Talmud just for the practical purposes, because we're not rabbis from Israel at the time. We need the whole discussion and debate. So before we go a little further, so here what was therefore was the Rogatchover was saying. The Rogatchover was saying, he's saying that the Babylonian Talmud sees the advantage in being able to really grow and wrestle with study. But they're telling me that if I partake in things that are not study, all I'm going to get is preserve. I don't want that. I want flourish. So now let's go to the rabbis who were Mordechai's peers in the Sanhedrin. One can assume most of them, the Sanhedrin itself, the rabbis, tended to be, the Sanhedrin itself was in Israel. So he would have had to be traveling back and forth somewhat. But there were certainly some Babylonian rabbis, we know that. But the majority were from Israel. And the majority, therefore, were saying, you know something? What's the big deal? You're in the way we study, you can balance the two. So let's take a look at this. Text 10. The Sanhedrin tells the Maimonides tells us that the Sanhedrin, as a matter of course, used to send agents throughout Israel to examine candidates for the office of judge. Whoever was found to be wise, sin-fearing, humble, contrite, respectful, and well-liked by people was made judge in his town. From the local court, he was promoted to the court situated at the entrance of the Temple Mount. From there, he was promoted to the court situated at the entrance of the Temple Court. From there, he was promoted to the Supreme Court. So we see that generally they went around Israel to find judges. One can only assume, therefore, that most of the Sanhedrin was Israeli judges. So, but now we say what was the priority of the judges? The Babylonian judges, we say, maybe they thought like the Rogatchover, we have to be able to really invest ourselves, and it's not just looking at the text. We've got to work with it and refine the text and debate the text. The Israeli judges, if you take a look at what the Medrash tells us, members of the Sanhedrin appointed by Moses, Joshua, and Pinchas ben Elazar were supposed to tie belts of iron around their waists, lift their cloaks above their knees, and visit every town in Israel. One day in Lachish, one other in Bethel, another in Hebron, another in Jerusalem, really everywhere, and teach the people Torah. So what the Medrash tells us is that the Sanhedrin were not supposed to be ivory tower academics. Their point was, you go out and teach. That was actually built in. Text 12. And say that cases involving capital punishment are adjudicated only when the temple is standing. It's also necessary that the High Court hold its sessions in the chamber of hewn stone in the temple. So when we're talking about a Sanhedrin in times of Mordechai, it had to be primarily was in Israel. So in Israel, the Israeli rabbis had a perspective. They were primarily Israeli rabbis. Sanhedrin primarily was in Israel, so it had to be logically more Israeli rabbis. And therefore, in the idea of the differential, the rabbis, the Babylonian rabbis, who Sanhedrin members who dissociated, it doesn't say they disagreed with Mordechai. The language, although in the beginning, doesn't say they disagreed. They distanced themselves. They said, I can't do this. This doesn't make sense that you're going to go be a minister. Well, the Rebbe's case here is that would have made much more sense to an Israeli rabbi, because you're supposed to be a public servant.
Okay,
You're not just a rabbi. Yeah.
but based on that interpretation, wasn't the Gaon wrong?
I would not have said that, and the Rebbe didn't say it, because the truth is, if they're, let's say Chabad, we're into study but doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're is in many communities, people can study in graduate school for Torah 10, 20, 30, 40 years. It's called Kola. In Chabad, the way that Rebbe set it up is 1 year. And then go out and be productive. Hopefully you're being able to help the Jewish community, even if you're going as a lawyer or a pharmacist, or also you're being able to help the Jewish community. But then you can have certain individuals who that's where they excel. And they're research individuals. Community needs them too. Maybe they're not being loyal to their own skill set and their purpose. If they're what they're doing is they're spending time trying to teach Aleph Beis to a child or to give a class when that's not their deal. And maybe those of us in the field need their research to help inform what we're teaching. So the Rogachover going is seen kind of in that way. 1 second.
Rogachover actually published the results of his study.
I have them.
So he did publish.
Yeah.
Studied for personal reasons.
No. He published a bunch of them, but it's very cryptic. It's all very full of. You have to be a genius to understand. No, you have to sit with it because it's full of. He knew everything by heart, so it's full of footnotes, and you have to figure out what he's trying to say. What he's saying from one to the. Why is he pointing me here and then to there and to there? What's the case he's making? He writes a little bit, but
So the people,
what's with the iron belts? Great question. The iron belts was the idea that this is I'm sorry, but putting on the iron belts in the Medrash there, the idea that even though it's more metaphoric, that they have to go putting on iron belts and make it a little more difficult to move. So even though it's going to be a drag for them to go from this town, that town, too bad. That's what public service is, and being a rabbi is not just sitting and studying and drinking tea or having a salami sandwich and being able to issue rulings. They have to get out and help people.
yeah. So the question is, what his writings are so difficult to decipher whether they're actually of use.
Yeah, there are views. Sure, there are views. There are a good number of things where I've looked at them just as a footnote. But yes, they definitely inform people's study, including my own, coming usually through another channel, someone who has opened it up. The Rebbe loved the Rebbe show. So he spoke about his teachings a lot.
Okay, the business with the iron belt, it seems to me,
Yeah.
is, these people are supposedly nobles at some level.
Yeah.
Rather than giving them silver or golden belts, by giving them iron, they're saying we are of the people.
That's a good. All right. I'm with you on that. That's good. I like that. Okay. This is not working. Let me just get to this. Okay. Here's from the Rebbe in 13a, page 148. Here's a message from Mordechai's behavior for all of us, practically speaking. We must all emulate, at least in some minor way, Mordechai's behavior and commit to becoming viceroy to the king so as to seek the good of his people and speak peace to all their seed. We all have a sphere of influence, and everybody has a responsibility to be some type of a public servant. So you don't have to have that. It doesn't have to be your job, but we can all impact somebody. Though such a commitment will demand sacrifices from many, forcing them to forego perfecting their own personal affairs. And that's a self-sacrifice. The sacrifice is justified by the greater good that comes out of it. We should all be thinking about what's going on beyond our driveway, taking care of ourselves, but trying to help the community at large. It's not just for Mordechai or members of the Sanhedrin. And text 13b, the final one, if Mordechai's behavior is called for when it comes to saving the Jewish body, because he was, then in Persia, it was really about their safety. Certainly, we must adopt this approach when it comes to saving another Jewish soul. We must sacrifice our own personal perfection to save another Jewish soul. So if I have a chance to study an extra piece of Talmud, or to go out and help, in the Hebrew school, or whatever it is, to support the Jewish education, Mordechai tells us, so don't get so wrapped up in your own Talmud. It's worth the self-sacrifice. Now, it's key points. Let's see if this goes. Let me get this out of the way. Key points. After the Purim story, Mordechai migrated from a life wholly dedicated to Torah study, the Sanhedrin, to public service in Persian politics. Some of his colleagues disagreed with this decision. Number two, they didn't disagree in principle, rather in practice. They couldn't bring themselves to come on board. They didn't disagree. They distanced themselves. It's not for us. The divergent approaches hinge upon a Babylon-Israel split vis-a-vis the question of, will I lose anything by sacrificing my time to help someone else? The former says ultimately yes, a little, while the latter says not at all. The next ones, we follow the Israeli Talmudic approach, Israel of old. There's no reason to ever hold back from helping someone else, regardless of the importance of your personal gains. And the Talmud tells us, God will preserve your study. Maybe you're not going to have the time to become a Rogachover, but it'll be good enough. If your life is entirely self-centered without any elements of public service, try changing that right now. All right. So that is, I'm going to stop the share. See if there are any questions.
I have a question.
Question, yes.
I have a question regarding heritage. So we know that Moshiach is going to be from the line of David and Solomon.
Yes.
Solomon had multiple wives,
Yes.
and he also had a harem of the slave girls.
Okay.
He had a relationship with them.
Okay.
Not necessarily they were Jewish.
Were they Jewish?
Were they?
Explain why that's. Let's say they were. Let's say they weren't. Where are you going?
Let's say they were some of them.
Yeah.
Some were, some weren't. And let's say they produced an offspring.
Yeah.
That offspring by default wouldn't have a chance to become a Moshiach.
Sure.
Mhm.
Could be you.
I mean, running,
It could be you.
No, I had a chance.
It could be you. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
You never know.
but
Yeah.
I mean, running that discussion, that point back. If you go back to the fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then even Moses, and of course, Joseph, none of them had Jewish wives.
Well, the thing is that in the times before Sinai, conversion would have been just adopting the Hebrew faith. So that was enough. Moses told that Zipporah did convert, as did her father. So, but King Solomon generally, he had Jewish wives, and part of what his downfall was not having Jewish wives.
Circumcised about children.
Who circumcised? Zipporah, yes. Yeah, that's what the Torah says. All right, so no questions. Wish you all a good week.
Got one more question,
Go ahead.
not in this discussion